Evergrey with the Storm Within, aka nobody can talk anything about me, not reviewing this Evergrey album, because I didn't review the last one and never got around to it. And yeah, fun times. I've heard about that ever since. But here we are, the Storm Within, new album 2016, 15 years after my ears first heard a Evergrey song, give or take on that, was from In Search of Truth. And it was given to me via a compilation by a gentleman that I was on a message board with, and I don't even remember your name. I thank you for that, though. I'm a bad friend. But this is a band in Evergrey that has certainly morphed and shifted a little bit ever since then. 15 years have certainly, caused some incorporation of different sounds. Back then, they were a dark metal band that had a lot of progressive influence that showcased that. In Search of Truth seemed to have a little bit more of a paranormal element to it that went alongside their traditional melancholy. And as we've seen in the years that have been past, there has certainly been some of that present among, albums that have since preceded that, however, not necessarily in the same level. It's actually teetering more to the point where people are labeling them more as prog-power as opposed to just prog or dark prog or whatever. Do we really give two craps about what they're distinguishing them as? We probably shouldn't. We probably should just talk about the music. So Distance is the very first cut that you get off of The Storm Within, and you get probably one of the strongest tracks off of this album right out of the gate. It's got a nice piano-driven intro that goes into a very powerful riff that really sort of cascades over you and gives you that good sense of what Evergrey is all about. Now, some complaints that I have read about Evergrey is that ever since they sort of particle together a little bit more of an identity outside of sort of melancholia and dark metal, that the music has gotten a little bit simplistic. That it feels like it's driving a little closer toward pop metal, which I'm really not too sure what they are kind of indicating through that, because Distance doesn't indicate that whatsoever. This is the Evergrey that I remember, not necessarily from In Search of Truth, but whenever you move forward in the 2000s to that middle range, that's where you start to kind of tag, I guess, where this song really feels like it belongs. But whenever you get into Passing Through and into Someday, I can start to understand what some of them are talking about. It's almost like music that perhaps if heavy metal were on the radio and heavy metal were kind of ruling the airwaves, if metal was the pop music of today or the pop music of any day, because everything is really just identifiable through names, through identifiers. Pop music is considered that because it's popular, but we have a real, idea or a real... We have built a mystique about what pop music is. But let's say that was heavy metal instead. Passing Through would be a track that you could hear on a pop radio station or a pop metal station, and it would not feel very out of place. It's one that has a very recognizable structure. It's driving. It has a real... It attempts to kind of earworm you a little bit with the way in which it's put together. And they do a fairly good job with this. Passing Through is a fairly decent song in that regard. It's a strange title for me because whenever I think of Passing Through, I think of just going to a place and saying, "Hey Bob, good to see you, but I'm just passing through, Maybe I'm heading down to Florida, or maybe I'm heading to Timbuktu. Either way, Bob, I'm just passing through. It was nice to see you, but I gotta go. Quite frankly, you smell a little bit." But whenever you move into Someday, you get a little bit more of a resemblance of what Distance was able to offer with the very first track off of this album, a lot more of that driving force. And then you get into Ashtray and The Impossible, and I don't know, the sales of this record, and by sales I don't mean, units, I mean sales like a ship, feel like they kind of get the wind let out of them every so often, because these two tracks feel a little bit derivative, like they're kind of copy-pasting some of the ideas or some of the emotions that are driven from the initial first three tracks and just placing them in different parts. The Impossible being a little bit slower, so it does have a different feel to it, but at the same time, it's not all of that uncommon for an Evergrey album. It just doesn't feel that strong, not that memorable. Going into My Allied Ocean, into the first of the two duets that are present here with Floor Jensen, which is entitled In Orbit. In Orbit definitely feels like the stronger track because of the real vocal clash that you get between these two, the real symmetry that they sometimes are able to paint, and then the difference that they're able to really showcase whenever they are individual. I love their moments where they can come together and really deliver some strong vocals. But again, musically speaking, you're hearing a little bit more of that power charm. You're hearing a little bit more of that power sort of nod, as opposed to some of that darkness that perhaps Evergrey fans of old may be clamoring for and have been for a while. I'm trying to, in my mind, as I do these review and as I examine where this band has been and where it is now, I'm trying to understand why a lot of folks have some differing opinions based around this group outside of just, I like this music, I don't like this music, some of the reasoning that's behind it. And while I am noticing some of this, within the music itself, I'm starting to understand that, over the course of the past couple of albums, Evergrey's identity has kind of been a bit stagnant. It's been one that certainly has kind of stayed in a happy little place. But I do have to say that The Storm Within, by comparison to some albums recent, certainly feels like it has a little more in the way of that dark sort of, I guess, injected in there. But where I really kind of see where the writing on the walls is for some of those complaints is The Lonely Monarch. And the reason is so simple and stupid that it will blow your mind. I feel like a BuzzFeed article by saying that, but the very first thing I hear whenever The Lonely Monarch kicks in is this kind of really positive sounding, lick. I hear this positive sounding melody, and it doesn't really seem to match up a song that's called The Lonely Monarch. Again, it's really dumb, really stupid, but psychologically speaking, it kind of gives me this really sort of disenfranchised feeling. I already feel more distant to the song based around the idea that it doesn't seem to match up what the title even gives you or grants you as an expectation. Now, it also suggests a little bit more of that power metal infusion, considering power metal always will have sort of that a little bit more of an upbeat, sort of, I guess, peppy approach to things, if you even want to go that deep with your adjectives. And that this definitely seems to fit that philosophy a little bit more. Now, the Paradox of the Flame is a duet that Tom does with his wife, Karina, and it's fairly decent, but at times it feels a little bit like it just kind of overextends itself. I love the idea. It does have a very, respectful and very sweet homage to it. I do dig what it does accomplish in, small doses, but as a whole, it's, again, not something that's immediately striking itself as memorable. But Disconnect, which is the longest track of the album at nearly 7 minutes in length, which is a duet with Floor Jensen, the second of two, definitely bears a lot more memory based around not only their give and take once again on the vocal department, but also the solos that you hear, the overall construction of this work. This is one where Evergrey aims to, I guess, write what feels like a complete song instead of writing a complete, what people would call pop song. And I disagree with that sentiment, by the way. But I feel like this is a complete song for them. This is 7 minutes. It has a framework, a nice body. They do not sort of neuter themselves whenever it comes to the instrumentalization. I like what this accomplishes. I think that it's a lot of strength that they could really use going forward to write some music that will certainly turn a lot more heads as opposed to just those that really like the band. And then we finish off with The Storm Within, which sort of follows that same philosophy, but again, the music doesn't feel like it reflects what The Storm Within as words tends to mean or tends to really, I guess, signify. So at times I feel like we have these old school Evergrey nods of old whenever it comes to perhaps lyricism, either that or whenever it comes to titles, but whenever it comes to the music itself, it doesn't feel like it matches at all times, and it's distracting is what it is. Nothing against Evergrey, because I still like the band, and I still think that this album is a pretty smooth listen, but either way, there are still just little things that can become very distracting, and those are a couple of them. 79 out of 100 for this album. I thought it was fairly decent. At times I did feel like I was listening to the same song either twice or some of the similar ideas multiple times. This is a band that I feel like it can really expand its horizons a little bit more. Not to say that this is an autopilot album, but it's certainly one that feels like it has some elements of autopilot maybe creeping in. Maybe that's just my own ignorance. It's very possible. I don't leave anything to chance. I want to know what you guys thought about The Storm Within from Evergrey. Let me know in the comments below. My name is Coverkillernation, and we still have a lot to talk about this weekend. We have a lovely graphic. Look at that lovely graphic. That lovely graphic. Oh man, that graphic's awful. But as you see, we have a lot more to talk about this weekend, so you're definitely going to want to stay tuned. I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.